GTM Production presents Tom Mason does an interview with. Hello and welcome back to the third channel. Yes, we're back on the weird side. The name that no longer explains what we do because it's no longer weird. Everything else I do elsewhere. It's more sensible. Unless you try and watch me try and describe bananas, that's not sensible. And we're back with another wonderful interview. Yes, when I say wonderful, I mean it. I said that in advance because we know it's going to be wonderful because I'm talking, so we know it's going to be wonderful. That's not me being a narcissist, that's me just telling the truth. And so, we'll crack on. My guest today is best known for working on the Virtually Parkinson podcast. Yes, we all know where this is leading. It's the one and only Mike Parkinson.
Hello, Tom. It's a life's ambition fulfilled speaking to you today.
And so we'll start at what I call the very beginning.
Indeed.
It's always a good place to start. How did you get into the world of entertainment?
Well, it's a bit difficult when you're born to the son of a man who has spent most of his life in entertainment, as it were, television and journalism, that as much as you attempt to try and plow your own furrow, you end up some kind of centrifugal force drags you into the same business. So I kind of ended up, after a few forays down different employment pathways, ended up working back in television. And eventually sort of gravitating towards working with my father in about 2008 when he went to ITV. But before that, I'd been at the BBC and various other august organisations in the time when television was contained within that strange box in the end of the room called a television. Of course, that's all changed now.
And one of the things you've worked on that I would believe, and I would say, it was excellent, not just because the programme was excellent and because the format was excellent, just because I love those type of programmes anyway, so it's like the whole genre of them, they're excellent. What was it like working on Parkinson at 50?
Well, Parkinson at 50 was an interesting one because it came to me as a kind of, it wasn't really, I didn't realize in 2000 and when was it done? Basically, 1971 was the first time when Parkinson was broadcast. It was in August 1971. And someone said to me, it's 50 years since the first Parkinson. And I said, is it? Because I hadn't really thought about it. And so I thought, oh, well, we should try and do something about it. So the idea really was that we went to the BBC and talked to them and talked about doing some kind of celebration of the show. At the same time, also kind of looking at my father's life as well, because his career and certainly his career, but also an important part of his life was wrapped up in that show because it went, in three different iterations. He was at the BBC from 71 to 81. Then he went away and he came back in 98 and then he continued on. So it's been this constant theme in his life. So the idea really was to kind of tell his story, but by using the framework of the show. And also, to a certain extent, it was just a celebratory, nostalgic look back with all that wonderful archive. Interestingly, the way that we formatted it came to us mainly because we'd worked together for many years and we were doing these live shows where I would sit and talk to my father and talk about his career and talk about archive, and we'd show clips and we'd take it around. We went to UK, went to Australia, all these stuff. And it kind of just seemed obvious that rather than having a series of talking heads, which I always found slightly suspicious occasionally, because in some of these archival programs, you have people who, they weren't even alive when they talk about these wonderful moments that they really remember watching. You think, well, you weren't there, mate. You weren't alive. You were an embryo at the time this happened. So the idea really was that we combined both our huge knowledge of it. And so it was a father-son interview, which kind of was the spine of the show. And in the end, when you've got archive like you've got the Parkinson archive, you don't really need celebrity contributors because you've got so many extraordinary contributors anyway. I have to say, it was one of the most enjoyable things I've really worked on. And it was something that Dad and I really wanted to do. And we're very happy and proud to have done it.
Yeah, and you mentioned there those other programs they have like ex celebrity, and you're thinking, how do they know about this? And that is right. You don't realize that
No.
to make something that's entertaining, you have to have people that were there for it. So you can't have like Bev who's done some on YouTube, and she was like, oh, she looks about 50, but she's really just 25, and she's on these things, and when you watch Parkinson, if you can tell that there's a different shift to, you can sort of tell what genre of type program it's in, but you know that
Yeah.
it's trying to break
Yeah.
that boundary of this isn't some Channel 5 cheap thing, which
Well,
isn't.
except it's interesting. I listened to a bloke. I listened to a guy who's the manager of the Sidemen
Yeah,
of the YouTube group, and I was fascinated by what he had to say because he was saying that about the idea that we no longer have a monoculture, and we don't. I mean, I'm talking specifically about television now. I'm talking about the media. We don't have a monoculture where we have this chance to have shared experience, generationally shared experiences, which my generation did. We did sit round and watch Christmas Day telly together and Saturday night telly together. And because that's what it was. It was in the corner. That was the box. My father's show would get, 15, 20 million viewers. There was a shared experience. Whereas now everyone has their own personally curated media. But what he was saying was that there really is that huge growth in this nostalgic kind of program for that time when there was a monoculture, which is interesting. And you are right. There's an element where a lot of them now are a bit sepia toned, a bit kind of teary eyed about the good old days. Because I think people feel that to a certain extent because I think it gives them a feeling of it gives them a feeling of a time when the world seemed a lot more simpler and a lot less kind of fractured as it is now. And I suppose that's kind of where the type television that I remember, and I suppose also that's kind of what we brought to the party at 50 was that we were celebrating a show that essentially created water cooler moments in the United Kingdom before water coolers were even existing in UK offices. So it was a very interesting. It kind of worked on a number of levels. It was good fun to do.
yeah. And a lot of people don't notice another water cooler moment could be if you knock it over. Go for the water cooler. Poor joke. But I do think that you can sort of tell when you watch old episodes of Parks and all other programs of that same era, you can tell that you know where the tonal shift is with TV, and you can tell that
Yeah,
it's trying to capture. Do you think that TV is trying to mirror itself to what everything else is doing, or do you think that TV is still in its roots that it has always been in?
I think the television. I think the people blame the media, blame television and films far too much for the kind of destruction of Western civilization. I think that television has always been a reflection of people's and societal change. I think that the best and most memorable programs are the ones that are riding on the crest of the wave and not as the wave has crashed down. Those are the ones that you remember. I think that Parkinson was a good example of that in the sense that because television was becoming much more technologically advanced when my father was there was a possibility of satellite. There was a possibility the world was shrinking and the world was changing in terms of the way that celebrity was being handled, the way that the film industry was developing as well, because the Hollywood system that controlled these stars was breaking apart. And so my father came on board at the right time with the requisite number and right numbers of skills and interests and created a show that there was a desire for because of the way that mass media was suddenly sort of bubbling away and the way that television had suddenly become the media as opposed to what it used to be before, which was newspapers. So it kind of captured the zeitgeist. And I just think that that's kind of what television and media does now. And I think that people can rail and fight against what's happening in the modern media, but the reality is that it's the horse has already bolted. I remember going to a lecture in Edinburgh Television Festival in I think just at the turn of the millennium. I think probably 1999, maybe even 2000. I remember a sort of very cool looking, scruffy looking kind of kid walking on stage and making this bold statement that well, there you go, in 25 years time you lot are going to be irrelevant, and he was from YouTube. And in the end, it's kind of adapt or die really with media. Media does not set the tone. Society and the audience tell it where it wants to go, and that's kind of what's happening now.
Yeah, and you mentioned there about YouTube taking over, and you can sort of see that from where I sit, you can see that ITV and Channel 4 particularly, they're trying to adapt by bringing their shows to YouTube. Do you think that's a positive change for entertainment, or do you think that that will hold negatives because it'll stop them from watching it on broadcast?
I don't think I genuinely honestly think that, from my perspective, it's very easy to be a Jeremiah and start, banging the drum saying, oh, it's all awful, it's all awful. I think any new change or new development in technology has birth pangs, and it has good and bad. I think the problem is, and in like all things, is that traditional legacy media, traditional media organizations, and this happened in the music industry way before it happened in television, they don't react well. I mean, they see these ripples coming towards them, and what they do is they build walls. They go, oh, no, 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 we're not going to let that in. And unfortunately, it doesn't really matter because, as I said to you, it's not about them. It's about what people want. And in the end, the audience will tell them what they want. And by the time they understand that I'm afraid that reality is the traditional model of television, the linear television, if you like, the sitting around there as a family watching the Saturday night entertainment is now gone. It's been gone for a while. And by the time they've realized that, it's difficult for them to react.
Yeah.
And so, you will have very difficult times ahead. And there are difficult times in the industry in terms of employment, in terms of how really these organizations like Channel 4 and ITV and really also the subscription model, not subscription, the license fee model, the BBC, how that will survive in this new, because I mean, your generation, I mean, it's not justifiable. You can't turn around to you and say you need to pay the license fee. Okay, why?
Yeah.
I don't really watch the BBC. I might go online. I might listen to a bit of radio. I might watch BBC iPlayer, but I don't watch BBC. So why am I paying this? It's going to be a real it's going to be a challenge, and it's my generation, and maybe a little bit younger, who are the ones who are really going to struggle with adapting to it.
Yeah. And you mentioned there about new technology. It's perfect sideway. Um, and how did the utilizing the world of AI and technology,
Yeah.
and how did the idea from your angle of the
Mm.
podcast come about?
Well, I mean, it was a kind of conversation I had, and I think you've spoken to Ben Field from Deep Fusion. It was a conversation I had with Ben and Jamie Anderson, who's also the son of Jerry Anderson. So it comes from a similar place as I do. The really simply is that when my father passed away, essentially I'm left with a company that has a huge amount of property, if you want, both physical property in terms of, actual rights and footage and archive, but also sort of intellectual property, reputational property, etc., etc. And so in the end, there's a two-way strand I have to look at. One, I have to protect that legacy so that I don't allow it. I basically make sure that I curate it properly, and if people are still interested in it, it's used in an appropriate way. But also that I need to, commercialize it, not in a rapacious way, but that's my core business. That's what I've built up since 2008. And so I was kind of thinking about what was be happening, and the obvious place would be, which we've never explored because my father was a complete technophobe, was to get into the digital space. And the only way to really do that was to look at how could we create new content, as it were, with my father's archive and my father's reputation. And of course, the technology was there. It was AI, and from my perspective, it was something that I wanted to explore. Mainly because I thought if I don't explore it, someone else will explore it, and they'll explore it in a way that I won't feel comfortable with, and I'll be playing catch up. So really, it was a conversation I had with Ben. I talked to him about it. Initially, what I wanted to do was to script the AI voice to essentially do what we've just been talking about: retrospective archival lookbacks on great people he's interviewed, or great groups of people he's interviewed, or moments from his life, etc. But Ben felt uncomfortable with that. understandably, because he's very much at the forefront of the ethics of this particular new technology. And he said, look, I don't want to put words in a mouth that I don't know that your father would have said when he was alive. And that's fair enough. I mean, it's as much as I worked intimately with him, essentially it would be me putting words in his mouth. So the idea, he said, well, why don't we try and see if we can get him to interview in the style, to interview in the style of your father. And that's really how the kind of podcast came about. And I have to say, it was a leap of faith on my behalf, because in a sense, Ben and Jamie can hide behind the fact that they're doing it ethically, that they are developing, they're using the new technology, that they're pushing the boundaries as to what is possible. From my perspective, I had to be very careful that morally and ethically, from a personal point of view, I wasn't doing something that really was a bit icky. And that people who loved my father, not just the people in my family, but the general people who loved my father, revered him, respected him, didn't feel that I was doing something which was completely disrespectful to his memory.
And do you think having you on board in this project helps make sure that it keeps it at the core, that it's not just some estate that's dealing with it, you're just on it
Well,
personally?
I think the difference between me and, let's say, a normal estate. I mean, normally estates are run by people who are essentially lawyers, or they're commercial managers, or they're run by family members who don't really work in the media. So therefore, they are not prey is the wrong word. That they can be exploited, because they can get very clever media professionals coming to them, selling them the world, and they think, oh, that's okay. Well, let's go with it. Whereas it's different. I come from a production background, and I'm very much, I'm very aware of the pitfalls of being too much frightened by the bright lights of the big offer, and being acutely aware of, if you're going to do it, there's two things. One, do it properly, editorially, and secondly, really should you be doing it? So, I mean, this is the point where I think that I feel much more comfortable within it, because I have a production background, I have an editorial background, um, and so I can kind of interrogate any kind of decision and make sure that it's done in a proper way. Um, I don't think, if I was a person as I've just described, just someone who's looking after an estate as a kind of an executor, or maybe just a family member, it would frighten me, I think, if someone came to me with a concept to do AI, because immediately I'd be thinking, oh my goodness, we're creating this Frankenstein-esque type model of this virtual being walking around the world, talking like the deceased. So it's I feel very comfortable with it, because I've thought about it a lot. I've talked to people close to me, and I'm working with Ben and Jamie, who I trust implicitly. They are very, very much, they're very sensible people.
Yeah. And when the news came out, and when the world found out that this was going to happen, and it appeared on shows and podcasts
Yeah,
in other areas like Richard Osman's podcast and having it on YouTube,
sure.
how did how did that make you feel when you saw this news spread so far and wide?
Well, I was expecting it, I suppose, and I was expecting the full range of reactions from people becoming, sort of performatively outraged. I mean, that's another thing that we have in the media now. People love to performatively get outraged about things. This is disgusting, and you think, well, you haven't even read it, or you've not watched it. So there's a lot of that going on, and there was a lot of very interesting comments being made as well. Um, and I kind of sort of bunkered down. Really, I tried not to get involved in the sort of get too defensive about it, get reactory about it, because the problem with AI, it's a very emotive subject. And as soon as someone says you're creating an AI iteration of someone, you think, oh, that's disgusting. How dare you? It's monstrous. And, you kind of think, well, you've not listened to what we've said. We never claimed ever that we were creating an AI iteration. We're not creating a generative AI um, iteration of my father that walks around spouting opinions, or sort of existing outside. It is essentially a very, very, very clever piece of software that allows an algorithm, a piece of code, if you like, to adopt my father's voice and to adopt certain tonal and editorial approaches to interviewing. But it's that alone, and so the difficulty is, of course, in this soundbite, clickbait, thirst trap world, you're not able to put subtleties like that out. It's an AI creation. It's monstrous. You're a grave robber, or oh, that could be quite interesting. So there's never kind of the difficulty with something like that is you can't have a nuanced debate. It's always yes, no, black, white, and I suppose that's what we suffered from it. But actually, listen, in terms of the coverage that came up from a simple little idea, really, in this incredibly overcrowded world, and the coverage we got was extraordinary.
Yeah. And I think that what makes it unique is the fact that people know who Michael Parkinson is, and using that
Yeah.
as a basis to say, well, you know this man. Now let's see how this technology works, utilizing that IP. And I think that that's what makes this unique to someone else doing it with some random
Yeah.
other person. Do you think that's what makes it unique because people know his style of interviewing and they've got
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to over egg it a bit too much. I mean, it is a remarkable piece of software. It's a remarkable achievement that what they've done. I mean, as much as I worked with them to make sure that it was doing it in the right way, the voice was sounding correct, the inflections of the voice, the interaction with the guest was as close as it could be. The thing about what Ben did, particularly Ben and Jamie as well, was that they didn't do what they could have done, which is they could have done it behind, let us say, the magician's curtain. They could have dropped the curtain and said, "Isn't this extraordinary?" In other words, what I'm saying is that make sure that in the edit that all the kind of limitations, all the strange things that happen occasionally with a new piece of technology were all smoothed out, and suddenly you had this incredible piece of entertainment. But what actually we did was we made it clear that all along the line we exposed the weaknesses in it, the drawbacks in it. We basically said we are going to take you on a journey that we are having as producers to see how we can develop this from a very low base point to where it is. And we exposed ourselves to journalists coming in who are able to see it not working, to see us running around like blue ass flies, to having a guest openly, absolutely criticizing it, 100%, not in a horrible way, but genuinely from a place of care because they knew my father, and also going to events and doing it as well. And I hope that what that did was it kind of it reassured people this was done ethically, but also hopefully because my father, he's so well known and so respected, is that it might have changed people's perception of what AI really is and what AI can and what AI can't do and what AI should and shouldn't do, and maybe just change the debate. The challenge we have is that we're in the business of making content. We're not in the business of reforming people's viewpoints. So there's that push and pull that we exist all the time.
And do you think that because of it being a success and you watching it and listening to it and seeing the development of the technology, do you think that helps to say to people that AI can be bad, but
Yeah.
this is how you can use it in a positive way, not to change how you do it, but to enhance what you do?
Yeah, I mean, you hope. I mean, I don't think. I think that we are but a dust mote really in the area of AI technology. I mean, I think people should be far more frightened about what's happening in silos in various places around the world of companies that we all well know and run by people that attended a very large wedding in Venice recently. We should be more concerned about what they're getting up to, really, as opposed to what we're attempting to do, which was we're attempting to, just push the boundaries of what is possible when you have a large and extraordinary and extensive legacy archive like I have. And you also have a man who people still remember and still would like to interact with in whatever way. I think that like any new technology, and we are in a new technological age. We just are. I mean, no, it's fundamentally going to change the way we are. as the printing press, let us say, changed the way we are, as the internet changed the way we communicate. This is going to fundamentally change the way we interface. It's going to fundamentally change our world. And the more that we can get comfortable with it, the more that we can take away the face of suspicion and fear, the better it will be. And the way to do that, I do think, is to not embrace it wholly, but to say, look, this is where it can be used. The application of AI into, I mean, there are it leads to other things. I mean, if you create a situation where my father is able to interact with people in an intelligent, empathetic, well informed and accurately informed way, not just, spouting nonsense that's been given to him, then you think, well, how else could that be applied? Well, what other applications could that go to? So it kind of, there is a wider issue with what we're doing as well.
Yeah. And before the podcast came about, how did the idea of the YouTube channel that the podcast now lives on, where did the idea of that YouTube channel begin?
Well, I mean, the idea that YouTube channel is something that's kind of, it's been an itch that I've wanted to scratch for a while, if I'm allowed to say that. The My father's archive has existed on YouTube in various ways, either from people literally pointing a mobile phone at a television screen to someone getting hold of Christ knows where they've got the footage from, and so it existed in a strange kind of higgledy-piggledy way. And the idea really was to create a one-stop shop for all of his archive. And we are lucky to a certain extent that we own a vast bulk of the archive that was produced here and also in Australia, because he worked in Australia for a number of years. And we are just basically providing anyone who wants to look at Parkinson or searches for Parkinson a place that properly curates his material and offers it in, three, whatever it is, high definition, and is a properly respectful and celebratory site. And the more that it develops, the more that we will talk to other rights holders who we share rights with, to ensure that really, hopefully, within the next 2-3 years, it will become the repository of every single possible Parkinson archive you could think of. And I think that's a lovely thing. That's a lovely memorial to my father, actually. I think that's one of the things that I'm most keen about. I mean, I think that the Virtually Parkinson podcast is an extraordinary piece of work, but it's not something that I'm as proud of as I think of this YouTube channel, which I think is a real good thing.
And I think that what it does is, not only does it let the older viewers relive some of their favorite interviews,
Yeah,
and let new viewers in, it also, from my eyes, it also saves the archive, because you know
yeah,
that some mediums eventually will cease to work. So having it on a one-stop shop for you
100%.
personally, it will save the archive and make sure it lives on. Would you think?
I think that I mean, we are talking. I mean, let's get real. We are talking about an entertainment talk show. We're not talking about a philosophical treatise on the nature of death. I mean, so we have to be careful that we don't overstate it. But there are some very important, people that were interviewed on there who said and talked about times and events and experiences that are universal and are important, that not just my father's generation or my generation or people remember watching my dad should look, but that kids younger than that should learn about. I mean, one of the things that I'm very interested in doing is going back to the 1970s, is to get that 70s footage on there, because there are some incredible people who are on there, and not just talking about making films, but people who lived and experienced and fought in a war, and not, it's not tales of daring do, but literally about how that fundamentally altered their perspective on life and fundamentally altered them as people. And when we live in a world where war is now remotely conducted, where it's at a press of a button, some poor innocent people are murdered, hundreds of miles away.
Yeah,
When someone's actually talking to you about what war really is and what war really does to them,
yeah,
it's an interesting it's an interesting lesson that you know, and so I do think you're right to preserve that at a time when you're right. Some of this footage exists is not even digitized because it's so bloody old. But so we could end up losing it. So that's what you know. Time is short in that sense, and it will be good to get it all on there.
Yeah, and that is what it's down to. Is that it's not just, oh, look at this famous person that was famous.
Yeah,
These really important things. And the other program that strikes me as one of those that they've recently re-aired on BBC Four to save it in the archive was Face to Face, and you have the
yeah,
Martin Luther King one, and I think that as well as Parkinson just shows that these things need to be saved because without them you won't know that's what it was like for them at that time, and
yeah.
that's
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you know, I think that the face to face, you know, it was a kind of it was an outlier really face to face. I mean, you know, John Freeman was a TV executive, and he had a extraordinary kind of brain, and if anyone wants to watch an interview, unlike anything you'll ever really see. I mean, we have very confessional interviews now because we have the internet, we have the digital arena where people can talk about, but you know, if you think about the time that was aired, and that was in the 1960s, I mean, it was, you know, it was still very buttoned up. The idea of people expressing emotions about their dying fathers or their struggles with mental health, and all this stuff came out in this face-to-face interviews. And you're absolutely right. I mean, it just shows that nothing is new under the sun.
yeah,
And the idea that somehow you know we're in a golden age of confessional interviews because of podcasts, etc. Well, that's not entirely true. It's always been like that. And there's also, you know, there are moments on my father's show where people reveal extraordinarily kind of private moments of grief and distress and failure and struggles. And you know, I I think you're right. I think that the I mean, archive is wonderful from the perspective of nostalgia. It's a lovely way of calming yourself. I mean, that's why people listen to old music. It's why people watch old movies. It's why people watch old because it reminds themselves of a time. It reminds themselves of a time when maybe they were happier, or maybe they were sitting with people that they loved, and it reminds them of a warmth. But I think nostalgia also has an important point. If you take a bit more time to think about it, that it kind of just reassures us that you know as much as we think we're in a brave new world, well, we're not
yeah, yeah,
really. We just are we're a bit more clever, we're a bit more slicker.
yeah. And you personally, you the type of person that when you make something or produce it, it gets seen on various areas. Are you the type of person to sit and watch your work back, or are you the person that never wants to see anything you've done ever again, walk away from it?
I think anybody who makes anything, I mean, even if it's, you know, a simple little television archival show, I don't think anybody ever really wants to watch it back because you'll always look at stuff and think, oh, Christ, I wish I hadn't done that, or God, that's terrible, or whatever. No, I mean, I tend to, my father was very similar to this. He never really watched back his shows. He'd watch it once and he never look it back on it. We kind of, we're of a similar view where did view that what we were doing we had to do it properly. We had to do it professionally. We had to do it to the best of our ability. But in a sense, once it was gone, done, it was gone. And it was kind of, you know, electronic chip paper, really. And it's more a situation where other people find it and other people, you know, want to revere it and look back on it. And I don't really. I mean, yeah. I mean, I think people who watch things that they've made repeatedly there's something slightly strange with them because I mean I'm not being rude, maybe there are people who are not strange who do that, but I can't because I just can't watch it dispassionately.
Yeah,
I just can't, or I wish I hadn't done that, or this is actually quite boring.
yeah, and I think that happens to a lot of people, and then I can sort of see that in my own senses that you watch,
Yeah,
oh, I could have not done that.
yeah,
That could have been clever.
yeah.
That sort of ruins your enjoyment of it because then you're too critical. Do you think that that's the issue with when watching things back because you become too critical?
No, I don't think it is. I don't think being too critical is bad at all. I think that I don't. What I don't think is you should just settle for what it is. I think you should always be critical. I think there's no point. There's no point working in the creative industry if you feel satisfied. I think as soon as you sit back and go, oh yeah, I'm absolutely brilliant. I think I'm the best thing that's ever happened. I think you should give it up because I genuinely, I mean, I did, there was a fascinating documentary on Apple TV, and it was about Jaws, the 50th anniversary of Jaws. And there's an extraordinary interview with Steven Spielberg now, and he said that I mean, you're talking years after Jaws had come out, and Spielberg was massive then. He was a huge success for him. That he was so traumatized by what had happened, and by what he saw as the final film, which wasn't really the film he really wanted to make because of all those challenges, that he used to do this extraordinary thing. He used to go into the Universal film lot, into the kind of the not the game thing, the theme park, and he would sit in the replica of the Orca, the boat from the actual film, and he would sit there and he'd cry because of everything that happened to him on film and everything that he'd never wanted to come out and all that. And I'm not saying that that's an extreme
Yeah,
example, but I genuinely, honestly think that, anyone in the creative industry, I don't think you can be too critical. I think you always should try and improve. And I think that, every single time you do something, it should always try and be better. Even if it's not better in totality, it should be better in certain ways. Maybe you're better. Maybe you're nicer to people. Maybe you've worked better, even if the thing you've created. Always try and always be critical, because there's nowhere else you can improve.
yeah, and I think that, and that's I've never actually heard that story before, and that is fascinating because
Yeah,
if you think about it, it's a for Steven Spielberg specifically, he's had this sort of career where he's made this film, people
yeah.
are scared, but then people have also become activists to be able to save it. So there's always a positive and a negative. Uh,
Yeah, of course, there's that. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, I just, I think, look, I think you're lucky if you have a creative ability, and if you have an ability to be able to express it, and you find an arena where you express it and where you could get paid to do it. You're in a very privileged group of people, and I don't think anybody should ever get too self-satisfied about that, because it's a privileged position to be in.
and with the success of the first series of Virgin
Yeah.
Media, with the potential, you definitely do know more than me on that one. The potential of a second series. How do you think that the AI is going to improve for the next batch of interviews?
Well, I just think it just by any new piece of technology or by any piece of software, it's just going to improve. It's just going to get better. It's going to get the processing power is going to get better. The interaction is going to get better. The voice is going to get more natural. The inflections are going to get more. The questioning is going to get more kind of reactive. Because the one thing that really with my father was that people, assumed that he had a list of questions that he would go through. Well, of course, he didn't. What he had was he had a list of headings. He would read everything. He'd what if there was a movie, he'd watch it. If there was a book, he'd read it, and he'd read a research, and he'd read it diligently, and he'd know more about the person he was interviewing than they probably knew about themselves. But when he actually went to interview them, he just had a piece of paper, an A4 piece of paper, which he just wrote down headings, with little things like saying childhood, or time you fell off the bike, or just little aid memoirs that would take him through the kind of style of the structure of his interview, and then he would basically see how the person in front of them reacted, and if they reacted well, and they could go off and start having a free form conversation, which my father could have because he knew essentially where they were going wherever they went, then he would almost throw that piece of paper away. So, a sense that's the real kind of El Dorado for this next iteration, is that we want it almost to, yeah, here you go, this is the guy, but
Yeah,
we really want you to try and have a conversation with them and try to actually, and it happened a couple of times in the first series. There are a couple of times when he elicited response from people about things they'd never really spoken to about. They've touched on, but never really spoke about. And again, that's because when you talk to a AI that doesn't have an ego, that doesn't have a family at home, that doesn't have bills to pay, that doesn't have a producer shouting in its ear, that doesn't care if it gets recommissioned, that doesn't really care how famous the person in front of them is, it doesn't really fancy them because it can't see them, doesn't really hear them. It just kind of takes it down, dictates it, and reads it. it's a very different dynamic.
yeah,
And so you have the situation where you almost have the atmosphere of an impersonal confessional box, except with a very personable and recognizable voice. And that has an effect upon a human in very differing ways. And so I think that, the more that we can play on that without it becoming too alien, yeah, that's how where we're going.
And do you think that this time it'll be slightly more easy to get guests on board because you've got enough episodes to say this is this is the type of thing that could happen?
I think that in all honesty, in the arena now of booking guests onto podcasts is incredibly difficult because in all honesty, there's a plethora of podcasts, and every single aspect of humanity's emotions
Yeah,
or interests are seemingly covered. So, it's a PR man's dream to a certain extent. I mean, rather than them having to be wheeled out onto various talk shows, TV talk shows or whatever, to answer the same question to an audience which, maybe 50% of them are going to be engaged, 50% are going to be making a cup of tea. You kind of look at, oh, right, okay, that podcast deals with, right, we'll go on that. This podcast is a step into the unknown. You're going to have to overcome feelings of suspicion, feelings of wariness, outright hostility towards the technology, particularly in the creative arena. Because if you're an actor, you don't want to be seen sitting next to an AI because you're thinking, well, hold on a minute, we know where this is leading. Suddenly, they don't need me; they'll just do an AI. So there's that. I think we're always going to be challenged to get people. I just think that what we need to ensure is that we just keep reassuring them that we are not taking them into something which they're going to and essentially feel uncomfortable. We want to just say to them that this is a once in a lifetime experience, because it allows you to talk in a way, to converse in a way, which I suppose has never been tried before.
yeah. And do you think that because it's a unique experiment, you know that it's unlikely that they might be asked a question that they've been asked 14 million times on 14 other programs where you know their stock answer?
Yeah, I mean, I think that inevitably, because the fact is again, the AI's got no humor. It doesn't laugh. It doesn't. You can't tell it a joke. It ain't going to tell you a joke.
Yeah,
It's got no humor because it's not human.
yeah,
This is what people have to understand. So when you're looking at me now, so you'll be reading. I mean, it's difficult because we're separate, but you will be reading everything from my facial tics to the tone of my voice to how engaged I am, and all that will be picked up. And a lot of our conversation is non-verbal, and so when you're with this thing, this Parky AI, he ain't there. It's in the room with you, but it's not. So you can't fall back on the old stories
yeah,
because it's not going to react to you saying, I remember the time when, John O and me, we got so drunk that we fell into a pit. He will then ask, the AI will go, right, da, 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 da. Or AI might ask you is, how did you feel about falling into the pit?
yeah, yeah.
And you'll think, well, actually, probably a bit of a prat. Might lead on to, I was drinking a bit too much at that time,
Yeah,
actually, and it wasn't really that funny. That's the point. In a sense, it kind of it it doesn't allow you to make glib answers, and many people tried it. You tried to glib, you tried to be glib, you tried to fire it back. There's a wonderful opportunity, I think, where I don't know who asked him, but someone asked him about what it was like being him, which kind of almost slightly fried AI Parky's brain. But you can't play those kind of games because it's not what people think. It isn't that creature from Space Odyssey where this Howl creature who's got this desire to murder humans. It isn't that. It's just a fascinating. Well, I don't know what it is really. It's a fascinating confessional machine, really.
Yeah, and it's one of those. It's like you for it's what I've noticed is for years you hear, oh, robots and AI is going to take over the world, and you don't think anything of it. And then in recent years, it's been ramping
Yeah.
up a lot more about it. And I think that having experiments like this shows that there's new ways of attempting to use it. You might use it as a Google search term to Google the definition of something. It'll give you some probably poor answer because you've probably not done it right. But I think that this shows that AI can be used in an ethical way. Do you think that that's what's positive from your angle? Is that you know that this is all?
I think, in all honesty, Tom, I think the problem is that people have already made their minds up. People in the powers that be and the general public have made their minds up about AI. That AI is bad, and AI is going to take over the world, and AI is going to destroy us, and AI is going to push the button, and AI is going to ruin humanity, and everyone's going to be out of a job, and we're going to have this Judge Dredd type kind of desolate wasteland. I think that's the problem, and I think that's the issue, and I think that in the end, and also the reality is that we are going into an area which is at the fundamental base of human interaction, conversation, and we are stepping into that, and people are quite understandably going, well, hold on a minute, what can AI do that a human can't do? Well, I mean, I've got a lot of things I can say that I believe the AI can do that a human can't do in terms of conversation. But we're going to struggle against that always. And I think that we just have to stick to our guns and we just have to keep pushing it forward gently, making the point gently, reiterating that we're not trying to reanimate my father or bring him back. I mean, I'm not trying to. It's not Hamlet's ghost. I'm not trying to reinterrogate my father about my childhood. There aren't any unresolved daddy issues I'm trying to solve. It's just a fascinating. You see, what people misunderstand, no, they don't misunderstand, that's patronizing. What people maybe don't realize is that when you work with someone who is also your father, the only way to make it work is you have a dividing line between the person that is on television or writing pieces or on radio or on stage with you and the person who is your father, who you love because he's your father and he loves you because he's your son, you're his son. And there's a dividing line. There is an absolute wall between that. And nothing gets between. There's no kind of osmotic bleed between them, which is why this AI is not my father.
Yeah,
If it's anything, it is a AI iteration of Michael Parkinson, the interviewer, who I produced, I wrote for, I collaborated with in a very distinct way to the man that I interacted with when he was at home.
yeah. And do you think that this type of technology and not just utilizing famous voices, do you think this will be somehow of a new like genre in the world, or do you think that this is a one-off experiment?
No, I don't know. Again, I'm not sure. It's difficult. Again, I think it comes down to the fact that I think that Ben is a good example of it. Ben has seen this coming, and Ben has just said, "Well, before we go, we better write some rules." And this is the problem. We're reactive. We're not proactive. We bury our we for obvious reasons. People get on with their lives. They have a job. They do their job. They go on. They don't take They get very blinkered. They don't see what's coming. And Ben has sort of seen what's coming and thought, well, we better do something. We better make it, work. We better make it ethical. We better make it so that people feel reassured about it. And I think we're in that stage at the moment where we're having a sort of an easy dance with AI
Yeah,
because we're not sure what the rules are. We're not sure where the boundaries are. And I think that again, if we're doing in a small way, what we're trying to show is that you can do it ethically.
yeah,
You can do it within parameters that don't overstep the mark. And also, what's very important is that people have to understand this ain't taking jobs, this is creating jobs. If
yeah,
you came on set with the podcast, you would see that there were probably 6 or 7 jobs in important jobs, not just jobs, because they were there, being done by humans. because of this podcast.
Yeah. And we've got to this point in the interview where people
Mhm.
have learned a lot more about you and everything, and they're all enjoying themselves. Um, Other than the podcast, have you got any
Yeah.
other projects that you're working on that you're allowed to talk about that you're excited for people to either see?
Yeah, I mean, I've got a number of projects which are very exciting. I've currently just written my first novel, which is currently with an agent of mine, and we're sort of going around the traps with that. That's quite interesting. That was kind of a novel that I wrote really in the aftermath or in the lead up to my father's death, so it has a number of sort of themes about that in it. Um, and then there's also a theatrical release documentary about my father's life. My father was a person that everyone thought they knew
Yeah,
because he presented this very urbane, charismatic, calming, trustworthy persona. And he was all that. He was an incredibly principled man, very loyal man. But behind that was a kid who was born in a pit village in the 1930s, grew up in a world without television, got two O levels, and should have gone down the pit. But because he had extraordinary far-sighted parents, he was set free to go and do something differently. And through his talent for writing, he went. And a series of events of hard work, talent, and also luck, he ended up, suddenly at the top of these stairs in BBC with a working class background, with a working class northern accent, in this most august of organizations, which was the preserve of Oxbridge graduates at that time, interviewing people that he'd looked at in Barnsley as a kid. So that's an extraordinary story. And within that is a story of a man who was riven by doubt, by insecurity. And I think that that's what we want to do. We want to tell this story about the man behind the man they saw at the top of the stairs. So the idea, I'm working with an Australian company called Songbird Studios. They were Oscar nominated for a documentary they did about the Ukraine war called the Porcelain War. And we're at the moment we're raising finance for it. We're doing, it's going very well, and we hope to have it basically as a theatrical release probably sometime next year, which will be wonderful. And the other thing we're doing as well is that we're writing I'm producing and working with a very good friend of mine called Stephen Lappin, and we're producing a stage play in which we're going to examine the interviews that my father did with Ali.
yeah,
Now, it's not Frost Nixon because there isn't that kind of backstory to it, but it's a fascinating insight into two men whose four interviews sort of charted the sort of rise and fall of their careers. So there's that coming up. There's lots of, and as I say, more virtually Parkinson and more to come. So it's hopefully a busy time.
yeah. And with the documentary
Yeah.
making, um, this might sound slightly odd, but how long will it be? Because the there's a Ken Dodd documentary that they had to cut down for TV because it was 3 hours.
Yeah. Yeah.
Actually,
Well, that's Ken Dodd. I mean, Ken Dodd's average theatre show was 3.5 hours.
yeah,
Yeah. It's. I mean, it's not. I mean, I no. I mean, I don't think he'll have to cut it down. I mean, I think it's. You might have to. I mean, I think anyway. Generally speaking, that you can. It's a good exercise sometimes to think. Well, let's really condense it. There are very few people's lives that can exist over 2 hours. I mean, in generally speaking, there's only so much you can make about it. Um, and I don't imagine it's going to be a full-length feature film. I think when you talk about a theatrical documentary, I think you're talking really probably 70 minutes, 75 minutes. And yes, I mean, inevitably there'll have to be some excising when go on television. But I mean, that's down the track. We've got to get it made first. That's a nice problem. That'll be a nice problem to have.
yeah, yeah. And I think that having those type of documentaries where you know that it's not come from someone that was a fan of the person. I watch a lot of documentaries about people and like people who are on TV and people that I'm fan with.
Yeah,
It's this and the Ken Dunn one and specifically the one you can tell that it's made from the person that knew them the best, knew them the most, and you can
yeah,
sense of love. And do you think that that's going to be the challenge for you to try and not just showcase your love for them?
No, I think that I made it very clear that Parky at 50 was a sort of celebratory, nostalgia fest. This has to be an honest reflection of him. And so, as much as I'm involved in it, I'm only going to be a contributor to it. I have to let other producers do it. I have to let a different generation do it as well because they're a lot younger than me. They're also Australian, so they have an extraordinary reverence for my father, much more probably than this country does. So they come from a very, very different angle. And I want that angle to be reflected. And it's a bit like the stage play. The difficulty I have is that, when I see people write stuff that my father didn't say, but they wrote it to as part of a play, I have to step back and think, all right, you've got to let them, you've got to let them do that because that's the only way this play is going to work.
Yeah,
If I'm all over it, saying he never would have said that, and how dare you? He never swore. It's not true. My father was a public figure, and his life was lived in the public eye as much, not a lot, but it did. And so, I think in many ways, I've got to if allow these projects to be produced and written and
yeah,
realized by people that are not me.
yeah. And with the play, when it
Yeah,
goes out and then
yeah,
inevitably it becomes a success because those type of things tend to do really well. Do you think
yes.
there's scope for that to then become a drama on TV or
Again, it's all up for grabs. I mean, to be honest with you, Tommy, all these projects, it sounds great and it's very exciting. The devil is in the detail. I mean, we are hopefully by the middle of next year, I'll be sitting back with a triple G&T, thinking, wasn't that wonderful and fantastic? I mean, it's tough nowadays to get anything away. It's tough to get money. It's tough to get commissions. It's tough to get anything, even with my father's name attached. It is incredibly difficult. And it will happen. They will happen, but it's a long road.
yeah. And I think that when you think of those type of plays, you can tell that they're really successful and because it's something that people remember, but you can just sort of see it adapts. And the other one I can think of that really catches it as well is there was an Edinburgh Fringe show. I can't remember the title of it, but
Yeah,
the ex-Blue Peter presenters doing a show, doing a
yeah,
drama about their time,
yeah,
and you can tell that it works because you might think that event, but then
yeah.
you learn about it and then you see how they've dramatized bits to enhance the story. Do you think that
Yeah, I think it, yeah, yeah. I think people are always interested in behind the scenes and a glimpse behind the curtain and all that. I think that there is a little bit of nowadays is that unless a celebrity's got a backstory of terrible drug addiction or appalling behavior towards children or appalling behavior toward their siblings or their wife or whatever, that somehow it's not there's no heft to it. I think that what I suppose I find interesting is that this obsession nowadays with surface, with image, with perfection, and also with being famous, whatever that means. This is a kind of an antidote to say behind all that surface, there is a human. And as much as you think you know that human because everything is airbrushed, actually, this is a real story. My father's story is not mundane, but there isn't any, oh my God, a moment of, my God, really? No, it's not. A lot of his troubles have been quite well documented. But what I'm trying to say is that what I'm trying to hopefully do with both his projects is to examine not only the struggles that he had as a man, like all of us do, but also the society and the politics with a small p that created him as well. To try and look back at that particular time in Britain, where there was a change that happened in the 60s that he rode the wave of, and how that was a fascinating time as well. Um, yeah, I mean, it's neither of these are going to be sepia toned nostalgia pieces, but they're equally not going to be character assassination jobs either.
and earlier you mentioned about your upcoming book. It
Yeah.
would you, if you're allowed to say, are you allowed to say what genre that the novel's going to take?
Do you know what? I couldn't because I don't know myself what genre it's going to take. To be honest with you, I think in all honesty, I mean, I trying to explain the book. I mean, it's purely and simply it's interesting from a perspective that I've always been a writer. I've always written. I wrote with my father, and it was almost something that when I was in the middle of, like I think we all did, we took reflection upon what we were doing and who we were, which coincided also with the fact that my father started to become ill and at that time as well. That I was left with a sort of strange situation. I thought, well, what am I going to do, really? Um, and it was always something that I'd really wanted to do. And I'd always had this sort of strange thought in my mind about a particular story. And I just really wrote it. And it's kind of just, it's not really, it's not really of the zeitgeist, really, because unfortunately, it's really about someone of my generation growing up during that time, and coming to not an unhappy end, but not a particularly satisfactory end. Um, and really, I suppose it's an interesting one because it's not very easy to summarize. I'm not really selling it very well, but I think it's an area that I think is interesting from the point of view that, as much as men's voices have been predominant for eons, and quite rightly, to a certain extent, we've kind of been told you now need to shut up and actually allow others to talk, particularly women. And it's quite right that that's happening. There's a rebalancing. Don't think there's ever really been an attempt. I'm not saying that I am doing this, but there's never really been in for my generation an attempt to say, as much as we didn't realize, we did live through a change in what a man was, what masculinity meant. And in many ways, this book kind of deals with that, with the way that particularly the 80s and going into the 90s and all that fundamentally began to change the gender politics. And so that's kind of what it is. It sounds incredibly boring when I'm talking about it like that. It's not. But anyway, we'll see. Again, publishing, getting books published, good luck with that. It's a challenge.
And without giving away your home address, where can people track you down online?
Online. I don't do online, mate. I really don't. I'm terrible. I mean, here I am talking about AI and digital. I'm not. I don't really. I mean, the most online I do is LinkedIn. That's it. I did Twitter, formerly known as Twitter X, for a while, but that just began to irritate me, and also alarmed me as well about how it was changing. I don't do social media, which is terrible, isn't it? Really, I'm a media professional talking about the brave new world of technology, and I'm completely and utterly a ghost. So they can't really track me down unless they want to track me down on LinkedIn. But that's it. So I'm sorry to be a terrible disappointment.
That's
I
all right.
don't even do Facebook.
Well, the only social media that I only use quite often is LinkedIn as well. So
Yeah,
you're not the only one in that boat. Um,
no,
so there we have it. Thank you for letting me interview you,
it's all right, not a problem.
and thank you guys for watching. Yes, there should be more interviews from me because I'm never gonna disappear. I'll be in your ears. That's my own fault for running 25 YouTube channels. Don't blame me. Blame yourself. You're the one that decided to watch it. I'm the one that decided to make it. It's a tip for tonight. It's your fault, my fault. It's all our fault. But hey ho, there'll be more interviews by me. And remember, no, I've forgotten.